Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the old paths. My name is Brother Scott. I'm glad to take a minute out of your busy schedule to join us today. Whether you join us live or recorded later on, I'm just glad you take a minute out of your schedule. I understand and know that everybody in this world today is busy, no matter what side of the globe you live on, no matter what's going on. Our lives are a lot of times chaotic and busy, but I want us to just stop for a minute and breathe this morning and be still and know that God is God. I want us to look at God's word. I want us to see that with God, all things are possible. That's a big statement. But with God, or with God on our side, or God before us, I want us to understand that all things are possible. They are that can happen, that can come to pass, that can be done with God. We're going to take a reading out of 1 Samuel chapter 17, and we're not going to read the whole chapter as we go through this. But we're going to read bits and pieces of it. We don't have time to go through it. If we did, we'd be hours into 1 Samuel chapter 17. But we see here where it's talking about David and Goliath, and how Goliath had come out and he had been against, he defied the army of God. And we had Israel on one side of the mountain, the army of God. We had the Philistines on the other side of the mountain, and down the valley where Goliath would come. Well, Goliath was a giant to them. He was, the Bible says in the fourth verse, and they were without a champion, the Philistine named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span, which basically means he was between 9 and 10 foot tall. He had all kinds of armor on. He had a helmet of brass upon his head. He was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of his coat was 5,000 shekels of brass, and he had greaves of brass upon his legs, and a target of brass between his shoulders, and a staff and spear, and he was like a weaving beam, and his spear head weighed 600 shekels of iron, and one bearing a shield went before him. So to look at him, he was very scary to a point. He didn't look like he could be defeated. He looked like he was going to rip them apart. He looked like he was going to terrorize them as he went through this, and he came through and he defied the armies of Israel. When he said in the 10th verse, and the Philistines said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that will fight together. And the Philistine drew near morning and evening and presented himself 40 days and 40 nights. So we see here that he done this every day for 40 days, would come out and intimidate the children of Israel here. And it seemed that they were hopeless. That word hopeless means they are destitute, in need of hope, having no expectation of that which is desired, impossible to accomplish, solve, resolve, despairing, giving up all hope or expectation. So they seen this Goliath, and they seen him come out, and they seen him defy the army of God. They seen him make fun of them. They seen him come out and challenge him every single day for 40 days, and they were hopeless. They had no hope in him. They had been brought so low. They're depressed. They're scared. They didn't want to move forward. They didn't know what to do. And so we continue reading on, and we'll get into 1 Samuel 17 and dig a little deeper here in a minute. But I want us to see, we keep reading on, and David was tending the sheep, and his dad called for him to come and to take bread and food and water down to his brothers that was there at the battle there, where the Philistines were there on the hillside, and he did so. And we see as he came up to them in the 26th verse, David spake to the men and stood by them, saying, What shall be done to this man that killeth the Philistine and taketh away the reproach of Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that they should defy the armies of the living God? So David is asking him a question. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that will defy the armies of the living God? Why is he saying it that way? Why is he asking him, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that defies the army of the living God? Now he stresses two things there, that God is living and that he is God of all. So they said, what are you afraid of? In other words, why are you afraid of this Philistine when you have the living God on your side? Because he's reminded them, with God all things are possible. And the people answered him and said, After this manner so shall it be done to this man that killeth him. And his eldest son, who was part of the army that was scared there, pulled him aside, and his eldest son heard him when he spake unto the son, and Eli angered was kindled against David, and he said, Why comest thou down hither? And with whom hast thou left a few sheep in the wilderness? Now, he says, I know thy pride and thy naughtiness at the time of thy heart, for thou art come down, and thou mightest see the battle. And David said unto him, What have I done now? is there not a cause? So we see here where Eli was upset. Why was he so mad? Why was he so mad when David asked him, who is this uncircumcised Philistine? Why was he so mad when he reminded him that with God all things are possible? Why is he so mad? Because Eli was part of the ones that were hopeless here. He was part of that Israel army that was scared and hopeless, and they didn't have faith and trust in God to deliver them in this battle. And he's reminded him there is a cause. And that word cause means there's a reason or motive that urges us to move or implies the mind to act or decide. The cause is exactly what David said, that they serve a living God. They served the living God. That's what David was reminding them here. And they were scared, and they were tucked in back behind, and they were not coming out to battle the Philistine because they were not trusting in the living God. You see, with God, all things are possible. And I want us to stop and think about this as we go through this. I want us to stop and think about what God is telling us here. I want us to see here that He is bringing this back to our remembrance, the cause, the reason or motive that urges us to move, that we know that we are His. Yes, that motivates me to continue to tell the world about who He is, because I know what He has done for me and what He's brought me out of, and how He's made me alive in the Spirit, and how I know that my soul will live forever and it will never see death, but it will live forever in the presence of the glory of God throughout eternity. And that's a cause that motivates me and urges me to move on and to fight these fights with these giants that stand before me. That's what David's trying to tell them and remind them. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 3 through 5, it says, "For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war after the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God, and the pulling down of the strongholds, casting down imaginations and everything high thing, and exalted itself against the knowledge of God, and breathed into captivity every thought of the obedience of Christ." So we see here that this battle that we're in, these things that seem impossible to us, are not a physical war, but a spiritual war. We see here to where the army of Israel, all they were looking at was this 9 to 10 foot giants that stood before them, that was decked out in all the modern armor at that time, that had every weapon at his disposal, that was ready to fight, that was born and bred to be a warrior. They were scared. They forgot that their warfare was really not the physical warfare, but the spiritual warfare, for God is a spirit. Read in John where Jesus told the woman at the well that God's a spirit, He must be worshipped in truth and in spirit. And if we do that, we trust Him, we acknowledge Him, we obey Him, we fight with Him. You see, the army of Israel was almost fighting against God because they weren't trusting in God. David came to fight with God. David came to fight for God. And David came to fight to be that instrument in God's hand. So we see with God, even taking this a little shepherd boy here, it become possible to defeat the giant. The army of Israel was scared to face the giant, the soldier Goliath. The reason for their fear, again, is that they were looking with the eyes. We see in Galatians chapter 3, verse 11, it says, "The just shall live by faith." Faith is the evidence of things unseen. So we see that the just, those that are saved by God's grace, will live by faith and not by sight. Read in Romans chapter 8, verse 5 through 9, "For they that are after the flesh do mind the things of the flesh, and they that are after the Spirit, the things of the Spirit. For to be carnally minded is death, to be spiritually minded is life and peace. Because the carnal mind is an enmity against God, for it is not subject to the law of God, neither can be. So then that they are in the flesh cannot please God." And that's what was happening with the children of Israel here. They were solely focusing upon the flesh and the strength of the flesh, and they could not please God in this. And we are the same today in the year 2025, when we solely focus upon the strength of the flesh, we lose the spiritual battle. And that's what was going on there. He said in the 9th verse, "To those that are saved by God's grace." Now listen to what Paul says here, because it's very important. "But ye are not in the flesh, but in the Spirit, if so that the Spirit of God dwell in you." That's how I know that he's talking to those that are saved by God's glorious grace, because the Spirit of God dwells in us. The Bible tells us we're saved by His grace, that His Spirit takes up abode or begins to live in our heart, in our soul, where He dwells and speaks to us and guides us, and the conscience of the Spirit shows us right from wrong. But ye are not of this flesh, but in the Spirit, if so that the Spirit of God dwell in you. Now, if any man have not the Spirit of Christ, he is none of his. David reminded the army of Israel something when he asked, is there not a cause? In the year 2025, I want you to know that there's still a cause. And in order for us to see the possibilities of the impossible times that come only through God, we must remember what the cause is. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 5, verse 16, he said, let your light so shine before men. Why? That they may see your good works. Okay. Good me, no. And glorify your Father which is in heaven. He said here, let me say it again, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. You see, it wasn't about me, it isn't about you, it wasn't about the army of Israel, it's about the glory of God being shown in the world. And at that time, the known world there, in that valley there, that they would see the glory of God, and the Philistines and the Israelites would be reminded of the cause that there is a God. There is none else. That they would see, that they would let their light so shine. You see, they had their light hid under a bushel. They were scared. They were not bringing it out. They were not letting their light shine in the darkness. And when they did, Goliath continued to defy them. The glory of God was not shown. But when David came in, and we'll get into this, I know my time's going to get away from me before I get all the way through this, and that's fine. But when we come into the story and we see that David come in and that he's fired up and pumped up to go out and fight this giant, the glory of God is being shown not only to the Philistines, but to his children. It's reviving them as they go through. You see, this world that we live in 2025 needs another David. We need to be the David. We need to be the David. God's children need to be the David and stand up to fight against the giants of this world. The spiritual warfare that we're in. It's another message for another day. David reminded him of the cause. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 3 through 7, Paul reminds us of this cause. He said, but if our gospel be hid, it's hid to them that are lost. If our gospel, the glorious good news of Jesus Christ, the good news of the saving of our soul, if it be hid, it's hid to those that are lost, in whom the God of this world hath blinded the minds of them which believe not. Let the light of the glorious gospel, who is the image of God, should shine unto them. For we preach not ourselves, but Christ Jesus the Lord, and ourselves your servant for Jesus' sake. For God, who commanded the light to shine out of darkness, has shined in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. But we have this treasure in earthen vessels, that the excellency of the power may be of God and not of us. You see here, the children of Israel, they were focusing upon their self, they were focusing upon their own abilities, and they had not the ability to beat the giants. But what did Paul say? But we have this treasure in an earthen vessel, that the excellency of the power may be of God and not of us. Let's just be honest. Brother Scott is powerless in this spiritual battle without the power that comes from God, because God is the power, not Brother Scott. I am this earthen vessel. I am this a vessel that's made out of the clay and the dust. And God has filled this vessel with his salvation and the blood of Christ that flows through my veins. And he has filled it. And it is my obligation back to him to let this shine into the lost and dying world. Brother Scott cannot do anything without God. Because without God, it is impossible to do these things. But with God, these things are possible. Let's move on. God has been proven. He's been tried. He's been tested. And he's came out on top every time. That word proven means tried, tested, experienced. God's been experienced. We've seen this in our own lives. How many times has God proven to you who he truly is in your own life today? In the year 2025, how many times have you seen God experienced in your own life? How many times have you seen where you tested God and called upon God and God came through? How many times? You see, how many times is it going to take? The children of Israel had already seen these things. They've heard of these things their entire life. They heard of the parting of the Red Sea. They heard of the manna coming down from heaven. They heard of the quails coming in. They heard of the water coming from the rock. They heard of the Ten Commandments. They heard of a cloud that covered the mountain and how Moses spoke to God and how they heard the thundering there. They heard all these things. They knew about all these things. Some of them even crossed the Jordan there, and God parted the water. They knew of these things, but yet they're still scared. Why? Because they didn't hold on to these things. They didn't hold on to the truths of God's words. They didn't hold on to the promise that if He was with their forefathers, He would be with them. That if He had brought them to this point, that He would take them the rest of the way. And the 30th verse says, and He turned from him towards another and spake after this manner. And the people answered and said, answer him after the former manner. And when the words were heard which David spake, they rehearsed him before Saul. And he sent for him. And David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight this Philistine. And Saul said unto David, thou art not able to go against this Philistine and fight with him. Thou but a youth. He a man of war from his youth. Look, you might not see much on this screen today. You might see a man that's sight is failing, that he has to wear glasses, that can't even keep his hair growing upon his head. It's not big and muscular as you would think a soldier would be. But I want you to understand today, do not let looks deceive you. For deep down inside me is a power that is upon all powers, and is a power that can't even be hardly described today. The love of God that sheds abroad in my heart is a power like you can't even believe to take hold of your body today. I'm not saying I'm going to go out here and run miles. I'm not saying I'm going to go out here and fight a physical battle, but spiritually, I want you to know that I'm as strong could be. Just as David was trying to explain to him. And David said to Saul, thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock. And I went out after him, and smote him, and delivered him out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him, and slew him. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath defied the armies of the living God. David said, moreover, the Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion, out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hands of the Philistine. And Saul said unto David, go, and the Lord be with thee. So what was David holding on to? What was David counting on? He was counting on the experience of God being with him. You see, David was just a little shepherd boy. He wasn't much to look at. And we'll read here in a moment, if we get time, about how Goliath looked upon him. But he knew the strength of God lied within him. And if he would just follow God, God would deliver what he had promised. And Saul armored David with his armor and put on the helmet of brass on his head. Also he armed him with a coat of mail, and David girded his sword upon his armor and essayed him to go. Made an attempt to go out, in other words, and to use it, for he had not proved it. And David said to Saul, I cannot go with these things, for I have not proved them. And David put them off him, and he took his staff in his hand and chose him 5 smooth stones out of the brook and put them in the shepherd's bag, and which he had, even in a scrip, and his sling it was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. So David was going to what had been proven to him and what he had tried and tested and experienced. It wasn't the armor that Saul had. It was the power of God that God had. And that God delivered, and God helped, and God strengthened, and God guided. He was even pulling down to the strongholds, as Paul said. Jeremiah tells us that we'll find him when we seek him with all our heart. And God said we'll be found of you. In the Psalms it says if we tried and tested and proven what has been experienced in God, we can be still and know that I am God. And that word still means free from turbulence or commotion, peaceful, tranquil, quiet, calm, undisturbed, still, being at rest. And we see this in David. David was quiet and calm and being at rest in all of this. He's just reminding the army of Israel who they were and who was on their side, and they had nothing to fear. 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 15 through 17, we see how this be still, know that I am God works. We see here where the Syrian army had surrounded Elisha and his servant in their tent. And when the servant of the man in the 15th verse of the 6th chapter of 2 Kings, and when the servant of the man came, was risen early and gone forth, behold, he compassed and the host compassed the city both with horse and with chariot. And his servant said unto him, Alas, master, how shall we do? Or how are we going to get out of here? How are we going to fight this? How are we going to survive? And he answered, Fear not, for they that be with us are more than they be with them. And Elisha prayed and said, Lord, I pray thee, open the eyes that he may see. And the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, the mountains were full of horses and chariots, fire around about Elisha. So we see to where Elisha was calm because he knew that God was God and that God was going to take care of it. Now the servant boy was scared. I don't know if he trusted in this until God opened his eyes that he was able to see. But Elisha, he knew and he trusted. And he went with what he had experienced before, that God before him. John 4:44 tells us that greater is he that's in me, or he that's in you, than he that's in this world. Remember, we talked a minute ago about the Spirit of God that has taken up abode in our heart. Greater is he that's in me. The power of God is greater than any power on this earth. Any power that Satan and his demons can cast forth. Look at Job. Even though Satan got a hold upon him and destroyed everything he had, he still held on to the power of God because he knew that it was true and proven unto him. He said, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away, but blessed be the name of the Lord. He did not give up. He said, naked I came to this world, naked I'll go out, but I will not let go of what has been proven to me, what has been tested and tried in my life. That's God. We got to keep moving. Time's about out. We can go on and on and on about verses that encourage us to go with what is proven and tried. In Psalms 9 and 9 through 10, it says, the Lord will also be a refuge for the oppressed, a refuge in times of trouble, and they that know the name of the Lord will put their trust in thee, for thou, Lord, hast forsaken them that seek thee. That word oppressed means burdened with unreasonable imposition, overpowered, overburdened, and depressed. That's what the children of Israel were. That's what the army of God was. They were oppressed. They were burdened with an unreasonable imposition. They were scared because of what they see and not what they knew. Be brave and assured that you're not alone. With God, all things are possible. Acknowledge God, and he will direct your path. We see this, and the Philistine came and drew near unto David, going down to the 41st verse of 1 Samuel 17. And the man that bare the shield went before him. And when the Philistine looked about and saw David, his disdain him, for he was but a youth, and ruddy, and fair of countenance. And the Philistine said unto David, Am I a dog that thou comest to me with stabs? And the Philistine cursed David by his God. And the Philistine said unto David, Come to me, and I will give thy flesh unto the fowls of the earth and of the beasts of the field. Then David said unto the Philistine, Thou comest to me with the sword and the spear and with a shield. So this is what the children of Israel had been seeing, and this is what they were scared. Here he comes, this great man of war. But what does David tell him? Remember what he said? He said, you come to me as I am a dog with stabs, and you're going to treat me because you're just nothing but a ruddy little youth. In other words, you're nothing to my eyes, Goliath's saying. And Goliath said, I'm going to give thy flesh into the fowls of the earth and the beasts of the field. And David said to the Philistine, Thou comest to me with a sword and a spear and with a shield, but I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of all the armies of Israel, whom thou defiest. This day will the Lord deliver thee into my hands, and I will smite thee, and take thy head from thee. I will give thy carcass to the host of the Philistines, and this day into the fowls of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And all this assembly shall know that the Lord saveth not with the sword and with the spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into my hands. So here's David being very bold in his statement, not because of that he was anything, but remember, he was just a shepherd boy, but he knew that God was on his side. Remember, he said, but I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the army of Israel, whom thou defiest. This day, he said, will the Lord deliver thee into my hands. David came to him with confidence, not in himself, but in God. You see, he acknowledged God, and God was directing his path. He wanted the whole world to see in this something. The cause of his battle was that all the earth may know that there's a God in Israel, that this assembly shall know the Lord saveth not with the sword and the spear, but the battle is the Lord's. Battle is the Lord's. You see, we fight too many things our own. When the battle is the Lord's, that's what David's trying to remind them. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 10 through 14, he reminds us, Paul says here, finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we wrestle not against blood, against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Wherefore, on account of this, we take unto you the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand within the evil days. And having done all to stand, stand therefore. For this reason. What reason, Paul? For this reason, that we can be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. We are able to take on the whole armor of God. Why? Because we can be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Not our might, but God's might. We read this in Daniel chapter 3, verse 16 through 18. We're not going to go into all this, but we all know the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, how they came before Nebuchadnezzar, and they would not bow when the musical instrument says they would not bow to the idol there. And it says in the 16th verse, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. In other words, we're quick to answer because we know who's with us. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thy hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. So what they are doing here, they acknowledge God for God to direct their path. They're acknowledging who he is. He is the God of all life. He holds life and death in his hand. If it's his will that they continue to live after this experience, let it be. If it's God's will that they die, let it be. Either way, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego here were winners. They were children of God. They were saved by God's glorious grace. I believe with all my heart, and they were winners either way. God would walk with them here on this earth. They would walk with him in heaven. Either way it went, whether they stayed alive or whether they died. But we continue reading on, and we're not going to get into all of it. But Nebuchadnezzar came back to the fiery furnace, and he looked at the men, and he said, didn't we throw 3 men in? And they said, yes, king, we sure did. And he said, but why do I see 4 walking around loose in the furnace, and the one unto like the Son of God? I want you to understand it was impossible for man to survive that fiery furnace, because you read to where they opened the door of the furnace, and it consumed those that opened the door. The furnace was heated 7 times hotter than ever. But with God walking in the furnace with them, it was possible because God protected them from the fire. The Bible even says they came out without even the stench of smoke upon them, without even the singe of a burn of the hair was upon them. They were just as healthy as they were when they went in. With God, all things are possible. We must acknowledge him. We must trust him in order to do this. We must be trusting in God to guide the stone. In other words, as David did there, we must be trusting in God to walk through the furnace with us. We must be trusting in God to part the Red Sea. We must be trusting in God to calm the lions. We must trust in God to defeat Satan. James tells us, submit unto the Lord. Then we can resist the devil and he'll flee from us, but not until we submit to the Lord. David, let's read on. I know time's out. Just bear with me just a few minutes longer. And it came to pass when the Philistine arose and came and drew nigh to meet David, that David hastened and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag and took the stone and slang it and smote the Philistine in his forehead. That the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. And David prevailed over the Philistine with the sling of the stone, and smote the Philistine and slew him. But there was no sword in his hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood upon the Philistine and took his sword and drew it out of the sheath. Therefore he slew him and cut off his head therewith. And when the Philistine saw their champion dead, they fled. So we see here where David didn't even have a sword to hold up the promise that he had already promised Goliath, so he took his own sword. So God provided in the battle for David to do what God had told him he would do. We read in Romans 8:33, what shall we say to these things? If God be for us, who can be against us? And this is what David held on to. David held on to what Isaiah said in the 40th chapter and 29th through 31st. He giveth power to the faint, and them that have no might, he increases his strength. David, to look at him where he had no might, but God increased his strength and his trust in him to where he would be able to win the battle. Even the youth shall faint, and the weary be weary, and the young men shall utterly fall. But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up as wings on eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not be faint. Again, James chapter 4, verse 7 says, submit yourselves therefore to God. Resist the devil and he will flee from you. That submission is very key in our life. We're going to see the possibility in the impossible times. We're going to have to submit to the Lord. Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 through 6, we say these and quote these all the time, but I hope they sink in today. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not on thy own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your path. So what is Solomon saying here? He's saying to trust, to place confidence in, to rely on God. Rely on God to be the possibility in the impossible times. To acknowledge that he has the power to admit him to be real, true, recognize the existence, truth, or fact of, to recognize the authority of, and the claim of he is authority over all, both spiritually and physically. He has authority over all. And we are to acknowledge the claims of the promises of God. Great is thy faithfulness, O Lord. We are to remember his faithfulness to his people that have been saved by his grace, and his faithfulness to those that are lost, that he will save them that come to him. For those that are lost, just one moment of time. Let me have your ear for just a moment. If you're not sure where you stand in the sight of God, if you're sure you're not saved, if you're not sure if his Spirit lives inside of you today, if you're not sure that the blood of Christ has been applied, that's some terminology to understand that we've been delivered from sin. If there's not been a change that's taken place, if you've not been born again, been made a new creature, as Paul says, listen to me. With God, this is possible. It's possible to happen, but with man, it's impossible. We read in Matthew chapter 19, verse 23 through 26. Then Jesus said unto his disciples, verily, verily, I say unto you that a rich man shall hardly enter into the kingdom of heaven. And again, I say unto you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of God. When his disciples heard it, they were exceedingly amazed, saying, who then can be saved? Who then can be saved? If it's this hard, if it's this difficult, who can be saved? Who can be delivered? Who can be changed? Who can be born again? But Jesus beheld them and said to them, with men, this is impossible. But with God, all things are possible. Man cannot save your soul. Brother Scott has no power to save your soul. Brother Scott cannot look deep down in your heart and tell you if you've been saved or if you're still lost and separated from God. But with God, all this is possible. God can give you the knowledge today to know where you truly stand in his sight if you're lost and separated from him, or he can give you the knowledge of your salvation. But it only comes from God. Remember what Jesus told Peter when Peter said, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. Jesus said, blessed be thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father which is in heaven. It didn't come by man, it come by God. Because with God, all things are possible. My time comes. I thank you for watching today. I thank you for being with me. But whether you're live or whether you're watching later on down the road, I thank you for taking your time to watch this video today. And I pray that you would see the possibilities in the impossible times. I pray that you will see how with God all things are possible. All things. If it be God's will, we live, we live. If it be God's will, we die, we die. But either way it goes, with God, all things are possible. Sometimes His possibilities aren't our answers we're looking for, but they're in His will. They're exactly what we need in our life. Remember that. Just because we make a statement that with God all things are possible does not mean life's going to be a bed of roses, does not mean that everything's going to work out just fine. That's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They still had to go through the fiery furnace. And through I can just imagine their emotions and their mental capacity there as that was going through. I'm getting ready to be thrown in. These guys just been consumed by that fire. And here we are bound up and we're getting ready to be thrown in, but they still trusted and relied on God. They had confidence in the promises of God that He'll never leave them nor forsake them. So even when times are tough, remember, if you've been saved by God's grace, that power of God will never leave you nor forsake you. God bless you all. It's my prayer. Come back and be with us next week, Lord willing. As far as I know right now, we'll be back at 7:30 a.m. on Sunday. If something changes, we'll let you know. But come back and be with us if you can. If you can't, please pray for this mission work that goes out every week, that God's will be done. God bless you all.